Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Alter Your Health podcast. We are live as we are every Thursday at 1 p.m. Mountain Time on Facebook in our group Empowered Self Healers, which you are all invited to join if you're not already a member of, and also on Instagram at alter.health. Anyways, we're coming to you, and the topic of conversation today is fatigue. What is causing your fatigue? Because fatigue is such a common symptom that I think pretty much every human experiences at some point in their life. So it's great to have a little grasp at what's going on underneath the hood to diagnose and to effectively address fatigue in a sustainable, understanding sort of way. But before we dive in, I guess if you guys don't know who we are, I'm Dr. Benjamin Alter, the host of the podcast.
And I'm Dr. Susanna Alter, your co-host on these Thursday recordings.
And we are both naturopathic doctors licensed and practicing in Carbondale, Colorado, and serving the whole wide world online via all of our services that are available at www.alter.health.
Mm-hmm.
So now on to the show, into fatigue. What is causing your fatigue?
Yeah, so we're going to cover some of the most common causes of fatigue that we see clinically in our practice. We call these kind of the low-hanging fruit. And so we are going to go through lifestyle factors, nutritional factors, hormonal factors, infectious causes. And I think we should just start off with the most basic, the most simple, which is how much sleep are you getting?
Yeah. And when we're talking about sleep, it's important to talk about quality of sleep and quantity of sleep. I think most people just talk about quantity of sleep, 7 or 8 hours. And, but a lot of people get 7 or 8 hours or even 9 or 10 hours and are still fatigued because the quality of their sleep isn't really optimal. And what we're talking about here is getting into the deeper sleep. There's a lot of, scientific terminology that we'll avoid for the sake of this conversation, but essentially getting into a state of brain wave activity where our nervous system is actually recharging and replenishing. And we can really only do that naturally, because there's a lot of sleep aids, more pharmaceutical sleep aids that put you to sleep really effectively, but they really don't allow your nervous system to recharge and to refresh itself. And similarly, alcohol is a really popularly used sleep aid that's really effective in supporting people in falling asleep. But the quality of sleep that people get while under these substances is simply not refreshing, not rejuvenating. We've all experienced waking up from drinking alcohol, and maybe not all of us, but those of us who have drank in our life know what it feels like to wake up after a night of drinking. Sometimes even a glass of wine or a sip of a cocktail is enough to disrupt the quality of sleep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is a really big one. Optimizing sleep is so important. Sleep is, it's one of our foundational pieces of health. In order to really provide that self-healing environment in your body, you got to get optimal sleep.
Yeah.
So we have other episodes where we talk about how to really optimize sleep and recommend that you check those out.
Yeah, we'll link those episodes in the show notes, which, by the way, you can find at www.alter.health. This will be linked under episode 139. Holy cow, 139 episodes on the podcast.
Yeah.
We're cruising. So onwards from sleep, because we got a lot of ground to cover yet in this conversation.
Yeah. And while we're on the topic of foundational lifestyle pieces that affect our energy levels, hydration is a big one as well.
Yeah. Water is the natural energy drink. It truly is. There are energy drinks are such a huge industry, and people are sold them as, some quick fix to their energy problems. But it's amazing that water and proper cellular hydration is more powerful than any energy drink. Coffee, Monsters, Red Bulls, anything, water is the most powerful, sustainable energy drink. And when we're talking about hydration, when we're talking about water, we've covered this in other episodes as well. We're talking about high quality water that is free of contaminants, that is optimally balanced with minerals, that allows the H2O, the water, to penetrate your cells to get where it needs to go, to charge up those cells. Because, it's interesting, this is kind of a whole nother conversation as well, but we are essentially full of batteries. There's negative charge and positive charge, and those negative positive poles in our body that are reflected in each and every one of our cells is super important when we're talking about energy production on kind of a biochemical, cellular, metabolic sort of way, and also on this more metaphysical, universal energy and harnessing the power of vitality that's available from our earth.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
So hydration, yeah.
Hydration, key, and something that people often overlook.
Yeah.
So.
Because, people who are tired, they opt for the coffee, they opt for even green tea or excess amounts of black tea and energy drinks. These things are dehydrating. Caffeine is dehydrating. And as we'll see a little bit later in this conversation, caffeine also stresses the body in a way that can lead to more chronic states of fatigue.
Right. Okay, so moving on, actually, before we dive into nutrition, I want to talk about one of the most common forms of fatigue. And when I mean fatigue in this sense, it's like more profound fatigue. And that is when people become acutely infected by a virus or a bacteria or something. And what happens when we are acutely ill, let's say we get a cold or a flu, our immune system, we mount this immune response, we increase inflammation in our body. And in that process, we're also producing things called cytokines. And cytokines specifically, they have unique effects in the body. Some cause you to be a little bit cranky, some cause you to feel extreme fatigue. And this is actually the body's brilliant plan to kind of get you away from other people so that you won't spread the virus to other people, and also to support you in getting the rest that you need to recover from that acute infection.
It's such an important thing to really understand that weariness or fatigue in that acute sense from an infection is not a problem, is actually the answer to the problem. Your fatigue in an acute scenario is your body's wisdom, and in a chronic scenario as well, is the body's wisdom to support you in getting the rest that you need and achieving that restful parasympathetic state of the nervous system that allows your immune system to be most fully activated, that allows your detox pathways to be fully optimized, and to allow your body to heal and to recover. So we need to listen to those messages, listen to those symptoms. And oftentimes the symptoms and the messages get louder and louder, and the message gets more and more fierce until we're really forced to listen. But we can tune into that subtle fatigue because, speaking for myself, sometimes fatigue will be my only symptom. Maybe just a hint of a scratchy throat or a little congestion or something like that. But I've really kind of been able to tune in to listen to that first state of fatigue, and then I'll hop in the sauna. I'll do my hydrotherapy. I'll increase zinc or vitamin C or these kind of nutrients that support my immune system, and I'll rest. I'll allow myself to stay in bed and carve out that time a little bit. Mm-hmm. Anyways, in acute infections and listening to the messages that are transmitted through those cytokines, through those prostaglandins and inflammatory compounds, that's important.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we got acute fatigue out of the way. And now moving on to more kind of chronic fatigue kind of pictures. And one area that we also have to look at is the diet, and specifically looking at nutritional deficiencies in the body. And so, deficiency of most vitamins or minerals can cause someone to feel not optimal. But some of the most common deficiencies we see linked with more kind of obvious, profound fatigue include things like iron, B12, or other B vitamins. I'd say those are kind of the first ones that most doctors look at.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need iron in order to carry oxygen throughout our blood via our red blood cells. And
oxygen is the essential ingredient in your metabolism to create energy. If you don't have enough oxygen circulating through your tissues and your cells, your energy production is inhibited in your mitochondria.
Mm-hmm. So we actually have a really great episode on iron deficiency, but just briefly, some of the other symptoms that come with iron deficiency include paleness. People may feel very short of breath when they are exercising or exerting themselves. They might feel lightheaded. They might get headaches more than often. They also might be craving non-food items like ice or hair or dirt. That's a condition called pica that comes along with iron deficiency.
Sometimes.
And,
it's really common for fatigue to be experienced. And then that's kind of like the first thing, depending on what lens and perspective a doctor or health practitioner is looking through, they might jump to one of these things as being the real cause of fatigue. But it's really important to take a step back and really assess everything, the whole picture, because I think that in my experience, iron deficiency is it's relatively common cause of fatigue, but I think it's kind of blown up out of proportion, and a lot of people think that it's really more of a root cause of fatigue than it really ends up being, I think. And maybe the same thing could be said as well for B12 deficiency, which is another form of anemia, leads to anemia from a different sort of pathway. But supplementing B12 for omnivores and plant-based vegans alike is actually important. The fact of the matter is that most animals that are eaten, that are farmed in our world today, are given vitamin B12 supplements, because vitamin B12 does not come from meat. It does not come from animal products. It comes from bacteria in the guts of those animal products and in the guts of human, and in the soil is really where they stem from. And our soils are depleted from these essential B12 producing bacteria. And as a result, animals, including humans, are also depleted. So we can get B12 easily in a supplement. That's what we do personally. That's what we recommend for pretty much all beings on the planet at this point in human evolution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I think it's also important to bring up the point that nutritional deficiencies often stem from a diet that are depleted or devoid of the foods that contain the essential energy that the body needs. And so the foods, if you've listened to this podcast for a while, you know the foods that we like, and those are plant foods that are both high in those micronutrients that the body needs to produce energy, but also that contain plenty of carbohydrates and calories so that the body can also produce energy. Because if the body's not getting enough carbohydrates, which is the cell's preferred fuel source, then you're not going to be converting that food into energy in a very efficient way.
Yeah, and just taking a step back, this isn't really an in-depth dive in nutrition, this podcast conversation, but when we're talking about carbohydrates and when we're talking about any macronutrient, we're talking about real food. Carbohydrates, proteins, fats, they all exist proportionally packaged in real whole foods. The only foods that don't contain carbohydrates are animal products. I guess milk and cheese contain some lactose, which is a type of carbohydrate, but meat and eggs, no carbohydrates, unless you're drinking blood, which does have some glycogen potentially in blood. But we don't recommend that. We recommend that you get your carbohydrates from plants. And all plants in their whole form have really essential carbohydrates that are properly and adequately metabolized by your body. Potatoes, rice, beans, lentils. These kind of things are really higher in carbohydrates, higher in starch, which is kind of the storage form of carbohydrates in plants. And we recommend that those kind of things be a staple of the diet, especially if someone is feeling fatigued, and especially if someone is living a somewhat active lifestyle.
Great.
All right.
So moving on.
Yeah. So we did say calorie deficiency, right? Because that is really, in our experience, one of the most really important causes of fatigue is simply not getting enough fuel. And it makes perfect sense. Your car is not going to drive that well without gasoline in it, and your body is not going to perform that well without carbohydrates in it or without fuel in it. So calorie deficiency, a huge cause of fatigue. And when we're talking about calorie deficiency, we're talking about the proper calories, once again, packaged in real foods that the body optimally metabolizes. So a lot of people are overfed but undernourished. They have enough calories, in their calorie profile day to day, but not the proper calories that the body actually utilizes adequately to create that cellular energy.
Yeah, this is making me think that maybe our next episode should be on like energy production on a cellular level.
Yeah, we haven't really, that's a module of our course, Medicinal Living, just a quick little plug for our online course. But yeah, we haven't really taken that dive on the podcast.
Okay, so moving on to the hormonal piece of energy production and fatigue.
I can't believe how much we're trying to cover in this episode.
It's
but
a lot.
We'll do our best.
Yes. So when we're talking about hormones, we're talking about thyroid hormones, adrenal hormones, also known as stress hormones, and also reproductive hormones. They all play a role in energy.
Yeah, and it's also important to know that the hormonal system, the endocrine system, is so interconnected. Once you push one hormone in one direction, then all the other hormones kind of balance each other out. And so that being said, you can't really talk about the adrenals or the thyroid or the sex hormones without talking about the whole endocrine system as a whole, which really stems back to the pituitary gland, which is the master endocrine gland located at the center of your head. So yeah, what did we want to say about hormones?
Well, let's start with talking about the thyroid, because hypothyroidism is a condition that a lot of doctors will kind of think of. If someone comes in with chronic fatigue, they'll say, okay, we need to test your thyroid function.
Totally.
If your thyroids aren't producing enough thyroid hormone, then that slows down metabolic activity and also slows down energy production. It's as simple as that.
It's as simple as that. And sometimes the thyroid is suboptimally functioning for many reasons. Sometimes because the adrenals are so stressed that the thyroid ends up getting stressed as well. Sometimes there's a hidden pathogen that is causing thyroid destruction that might be diagnosed as an autoimmune condition or Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Sometimes there is a deficiency in sex hormones and kind of an imbalance in the sex hormone production, which causes the adrenal glands to try to compensate, which causes the thyroid to try to compensate as well. So once again, the interconnectedness of the endocrine system, really complicated stuff. And obviously, we're not going to tweeze it all apart in this conversation, but just addressing hormone balancing in general can be a good, important direction to look at when addressing chronic fatigue. And this is done through addressing and bolstering the foundations of health, which we talk about to some extent in every one of our podcast episodes.
Yeah, so then let's talk about adrenals, because I think adrenal fatigue is a super duper trendy kind of term diagnosis. And I think a lot of people, when they experience chronic fatigue, they think, oh, there's got to be something wrong with my adrenals. They must be fatigued.
And most of the time, that's true to some extent. Most of the time when there is fatigue, the adrenals are working extra hard. They're either working extra hard or they have been working extra hard for so long that they are quote unquote depleted or fatigued.
Mm-hmm.
So they're either in overdrive compensation mode or, past that in kind of depletion.
Yeah. And so the adrenals, they produce actually a few different types of hormones. I'd say probably one of the most popular hormones that people talk about is cortisol. And cortisol is that hormone that really, kind of mounts that sympathetic nervous system kind of response. It mounts, you actually get a surge in cortisol when you wake up in the morning, and that helps you feel awake. And the adrenal glands, they also produce norepinephrine, also known as adrenaline. And so that's also, again, another kind of stress response hormone that kind of, gets your body ready to run and hide from the tiger, fight the tiger.
Yeah, and the adrenal glands also secrete sex hormones, DHEA, which is kind of a master sex hormone, and also to some extent testosterone and estrogens. And adrenals also secrete aldosterone, right? And I'm like pulling this out, but
good memory.
But all sorts of things that, so the adrenals, if they're stressed on kind of this cortisol burnout, adrenaline level, then my point is that everything else, once again, can be influenced and kind of put off balance as well. So the adrenals are not, even though they get a lot of hype, and even though we talk about the adrenals as being, their adrenals are stressed, or the adrenals are burnt out, or blah, blah, blah. We kind of simplified this, but it's not that simple. Mm-hmm. That's for sure.
Right.
So
did you want to talk more about sex hormones?
Well, in my experience, I'll just share very briefly, that was really one of the root causes of my experience of fatigue in medical school. Was for sure the adrenals were probably involved. For sure there was some level of calorie deficiency, and there was also a significant measurable decline in sex hormone, for me, testosterone. And I think those were the three ingredients that were really at the source of my chronic fatigue. And maybe the calorie deficiency and the psychological stress, and that was really the root of the issue. And once I kind of addressed that, then my testosterone naturally balanced, then my adrenals naturally balanced as well. But I'm a big fan of using food and using herbs and using natural medicines very mindfully, very intentionally, and medicinally to support the body and kind of nudging it back into balance and creating this resilience, especially if we're in medical school, especially if we're experiencing these kind of, ongoing, we'll call them stressors, even though we have a unique relationship to stress in that it's kind of created from the inside out. That being said, we can be in stressful or potentially more stress-provoking situations. So when we are, I think we can be even more diligent with our foundation of health, especially food as medicine, and especially maybe introducing some herbs with the guidance of a naturopathic doctor or someone who is educated.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's talk about chronic fatigue due to chronic infections, because maybe some of you out there have heard of the diagnosis or the label chronic fatigue syndrome. And this is a big one. It seems like it's kind of on the rise, and there's more and more research pointing to an infectious cause of chronic fatigue syndrome, linked with different viruses, Lyme disease, Epstein-Barr virus, cytomegalovirus, really anything. And so that is also very much linked with immune suppression. And just wanted to really point out that, I don't know what I wanted to point out with this.
Well,
what do you want to point out with this?
Yeah, thanks for bringing it up. Huge topic, important topic. I think that I think the point is, if we kind of look at all of these things that we've covered, we've looked at sleep, and sleep is good. We looked at, acute infections. We look at our nutrition. We're doing everything. We look at stress. We look at kind of our connection with ourselves and with our spiritual purpose. We look at all these things, and there's still this persistent chronic fatigue. Then it can be important to kind of look at the integrity and the resilience of the immune system as a whole, and not really just on an acute level. And all of those things, the sleep, the nutrition, the stress, the connection with purpose, all of these things that are foundational determinants of health, hydration and activity and movement, all of these things do slowly over time support the rebuilding and resilience of the immune system in battling these chronic infections that might be at the root cause of chronic fatigue syndrome. And sometimes in that sort of chronic infection state, sometimes additional therapies can be important. Sometimes just the lifestyle medicine, just that strong foundation of health. Sometimes that's not quite enough depending on where someone is in their infectious state. That's always the place to start. But sometimes on top of that, we can look at other antiviral herbs, other, specific minerals or vitamins that support the immune system, these sort of things on an individualized level.
Yeah. And so this list of kind of more physical causes it's not a complete list. There are many other causes. And, we just went over some of the most common causes. And of course, if you are experiencing chronic fatigue and, you're not feeling better and you don't know the clear cause of it, we would of course support you in seeking help from your doctor.
We would support. We would love to support you ourselves as well.
Oh yeah, I always forget to say that.
But is that what you were trying to say? Or we support you also in asking your doctor, if you're working with them, bringing up these things. Hey,
Exactly.
Have you considered measuring my B12? Hey, have you considered looking for this infection? Have you considered these kind of things? Be a proactive advocate in your health with your doctor. Or if you want to talk with us, we are always considering these things as well. So that door is open.
Okay, and then moving on to, again, one of the most common causes that is so often overlooked, and that is stress.
Oh gosh. Well, we kind of dabbled on the stress topic, and we do in pretty much every conversation that we have on this podcast. I mean, I don't know what else we want to go into in terms of this conversation today, but just understanding that our perception of stress, perceived stress, is really what matters.
Well, yeah, I mean,
perceived stress is really all there is, because once again, we can be in a war zone. There can be bombs dropping in our backyard, and we can be calm, or we can perceive stress. So, obviously that's kind of a dramatic example.
Well, yeah, let's just point to some of the most common mundane examples, which I experience at several points throughout the day. It's like if I get in a thought process of dread, or, oh, I don't want to do that, or, even if I get caught up in thoughts about, negativity, self-blame, or thinking sad thoughts about someone else, my energy immediately goes down, and I just want to hang out and not really do anything.
Yeah. And I think it's important to tie, because we experience stress. We experience that perception of stress in our mind and our thoughts and in our physiology on a moment-to-moment basis. But so many people have been programmed to have a high tolerance to stress, which we think of as being a good thing. We can tolerate a lot of stress. We can live in our stressful world and we can tolerate it. But what that means is that the body is always ramping up the stress response. The immune system is always suffering a little bit, is a little bit suppressed. We've got cortisol to some degree coursing through our veins in higher amounts than we would really ideally want. And that becomes our baseline normal. And we become used to that. And we actually, in some instances, become addicted to that and dependent upon that low-grade stress response being our baseline. And not being stressed becomes uncomfortable. Being at our innate, healthy, equilibrium, peaceful state becomes a little like uncomfortable and unfamiliar. So reconnecting with our essential nature, reconnecting with our true peaceful essence becomes a priority. And the way that we do that, which obviously we're not going to be able to dive into here, is simply through understanding the nature of how the mind works, understanding the nature of what perception is, what our perception of stress is, and learning how to let go of thoughts and be more present in the moment.
Yeah. And really understanding that our thoughts and energy level can change drastically moment to moment. For example, if someone's stuck in a negative thought kind of storm, and then someone says, "Oh, hey, want to go out and get pizza with me?" You might just spring up. "Oh, yeah,
Bye-bye chronic fatigue.
I have energy for that."
Yeah.
Even if it's just for a moment.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Well, I thought we were going to keep this conversation short, but once again, these podcast conversations, I love them. And I'm okay with them drawing out. Hopefully our listeners are still engaged, and you can leave some feedback, leave a comment, leave a rating or review. Is this too much? Are we flooding you with too much information? You can let us know and we can tone these conversations back. But we love, as you can tell, we love sharing this kind of stuff. And if things resonate, feel free to join the Empowered Self-Healers Facebook group, first and foremost, if you haven't done so already. Head on over to www.alter.health and learn what sort of services we have, including our online course and mastermind, our medicinal living mastermind, which starts in just a couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if a mastermind with us is something that you think may be of interest, we invite you to join our free 5-day series kind of leading up to the mastermind. And this is called the Self-Healing Master Series. And we're really, really focusing on cultivating a self-healing mindset and really maximizing your body's self-healing capability.
And your connection with your wisdom, which is the source of medicine in your life. You are your healer. And as you connect with that self-healer inside, you're no longer dependent or reliant on outside sources of medicine and information. You've got it. So that's our mission, our vision, and thanks.
To register for that, go to the link in our bio on Instagram, or go to https://community.alter.health/self-healing-master-series.
Oh my gosh. If you're able to do that, more power to you.
Or just go to our website.
Just go to our website. There'll be something that pops up and you join us.
Yeah.
All right. So thanks for tuning in. Sorry it was a longer episode today, but we look forward to seeing you next week, same time, same place, in our Empowered Self-Healers Facebook group. All right. Take care. Peace and love.
Bye for now.